The eastern front of Ukraine has seen countless clashes since the war began, but nothing like what unfolded at dawn on September 12, 2025. What started as a Russian show of strength turned into a fiery disaster, broadcast across the world in real time. At 5:20 a.m., near the Donetsk-Luhansk border, Ukrainian surveillance drones captured an armored convoy pushing deep into contested territory. 70 Russian tanks, escorted by mine-clearing vehicles and infantry fighting vehicles, moved in perfect formation. Their tracks chewed through farmland, leaving deep scars across the soil. Overhead, reconnaissance UAVs circled like vultures, scanning for ambushes. Moscow believed this was their unstoppable wedge, designed to punch through Ukraine's defenses in a single, brutal thrust. But what the Russians couldn't see was that Ukraine had been waiting. Weeks of planning, new NATO-supplied hardware, and homemade ingenuity had been woven into one operation. And when the first tank rolled into the designated zone, Ukraine struck. A sudden roar from the sky, a flash of fire, and chaos ripped through the Russian formation. Ukrainian drones, small, fast, and armed with explosive payloads, descended on the convoy like a swarm. Within minutes, black smoke spiraled into the morning sky as tanks exploded one after another. Crews scrambled for cover, soldiers fired wildly into the air, but nothing could stop the ambush once it had begun. This was not just another battle. It was a test of modern warfare. Drones versus steel, speed versus mass, precision versus brute force. And the result left Russia stunned. So how did Ukraine dismantle one of Moscow's most powerful armored thrusts in a single morning? And what happened after the fiery ambush? Stay with us, because the ending is even more shocking than the beginning. For Moscow, the plan looked flawless on paper. 70 tanks, 30 armored engineering vehicles, and over 1,000 infantry were lined up for the strike. It was more than just firepower. It was theater, a show of dominance meant to break Ukrainian morale before the day had even begun. The convoy moved in perfect order. At the front, mine-clearing vehicles churned the ground with massive rollers, smashing through the earth to expose hidden explosives. Behind them, Russia's prized T-90 tanks advanced with barrels raised high, their 125mm cannons capable of firing armor-piercing rounds at more than 5,000 feet per second. Each tank weighed close to 50 tons, and together they formed a steel wall more than 2 kilometers long. Infantry fighting vehicles rolled alongside, carrying squads of Russian soldiers armed with anti-tank missiles and grenade launchers. Overhead, a second wave took shape. Dozens of reconnaissance drones buzzed across the sky, sending live feeds back to Russian commanders. Their mission was to blind Ukrainian defenses, jam communications, and clear the path for armor. The convoy stretched across open farmland, its engines roaring so loud that villagers miles away woke in panic. To anyone watching, the sight was overwhelming. An iron fist pressing relentlessly west. Russian commanders were confident. This was not a probing raid or a diversion. This was the decisive strike meant to collapse Ukraine's eastern defenses and cut supply lines to the north. They believed the sheer mass of armor and manpower would be unstoppable. No ambush, no artillery strike, no drone swarm could possibly stop 70 tanks advancing together in daylight. But confidence is often the first casualty of war. What Moscow hadn't anticipated was that Ukraine had already mapped the route, studied every contour of the terrain, and prepared an ambush designed not just to slow the convoy, but to dismantle it piece by piece. And when the Russians crossed into the zone, Ukraine revealed its hand. At exactly 5:37 a.m., the first strike came from above. Ukrainian operators, hidden miles away in fortified bunkers, launched swarms of quadcopters and fixed-wing drones armed with improvised explosive charges. Some carried anti-armor grenades modified with shaped charges. Others carried small but deadly warheads designed to punch through engine decks. The Russian column didn't see them at first. Against the gray dawn sky, the drones were almost invisible. Their electric motors whisper quiet compared to the roar of tank engines. Then the first tank at the front of the formation erupted in flames. A drone had dropped directly onto its engine grill, detonating with surgical precision. Black smoke poured upward, and the column stalled. Within seconds, more drones descended. 5 tanks were hit in under 3 minutes. Explosions tore open fuel tanks, flames spread across dry fields, and panic rippled through the infantry riding behind the armor. Russian soldiers scattered from their vehicles, firing rifles and machine guns into the sky. But the drones were too fast, too agile, weaving through gunfire before slamming into their targets. The convoy's radios lit up with confusion. Some commanders ordered crews to hold formation, others shouted for dispersal. That hesitation was fatal. Ukrainian drones circled back for second and third runs, focusing on vehicles bunched together in the kill zone. An entire section of armored personnel carriers went up in fireballs as multiple drones struck almost simultaneously. Meanwhile, Ukrainian artillery joined the assault. Precision-guided shells, fed coordinates by reconnaissance UAVs, landed among the trapped vehicles. Each impact shattered steel and hurled shrapnel through the ranks. Soldiers crouching in ditches suddenly found themselves under a rain of fire they could not see coming. For the Russians, the battlefield had turned into a nightmare. What had begun as a confident advance was now chaos. Burning wrecks blocking the road, infantry pinned down, and drones still circling above like vultures. And Ukraine wasn't finished. The ambush was only the first stage. The next move would break the convoy completely. The first wave of drone strikes had stalled the Russian column, but General Oleksandr Syrskyi knew hesitation would let Moscow regroup. He gave the order for the second phase, a full-scale drone assault supported by heavy firepower. From concealed positions behind the tree line, another swarm of Ukrainian UAVs launched. These weren't just explosive drones. Many carried shaped charge warheads designed to slice through tank armor like a hot knife through steel. Others were modified with thermobaric payloads, engineered to devastate infantry packed into vehicles or hiding in trenches. The effect was immediate. 20 drones dived almost simultaneously on the center of the convoy. 3 tanks exploded in brilliant fireballs, their turrets hurled skyward. An armored personnel carrier packed with Russian soldiers was struck twice, erupting in a mushroom of smoke and flame. Survivors scrambled into roadside ditches, only to be met with machine gun fire from Ukrainian squads hidden in camouflaged bunkers. Then came the heavy weapons. From forested flanks, Ukrainian artillery batteries thundered. Self-propelled howitzers unleashed precision shells guided by drone feeds. Each impact tore apart stalled vehicles, cutting the convoy into isolated fragments. To the east, mobile rocket launchers rained down cluster munitions, scattering Russian infantry who tried to regroup. Above it all, Ukraine's electronic warfare units jammed Russian communications. Orders became garbled, drone operators lost signal, and tank crews were left blind. Panic spread. A few Russian vehicles tried to reverse out of the kill zone, only to collide with burning wrecks blocking the road. Others pressed forward blindly, driving straight into Ukrainian crosshairs. Within 30 minutes, the convoy had been transformed into a graveyard of steel. At least a dozen tanks were burning. Smoke rose hundreds of feet into the sky, and Russian infantry were scattered and leaderless. But Syrskyi wasn't finished. The drones had broken the formation. Now it was time for Ukraine's armored spearheads to strike from the shadows. As the drone war raged overhead and artillery fire hammered the convoy, Ukraine's most decisive move was about to begin. From the cover of dense forests flanking the battlefield, Ukrainian tank columns rumbled into action. Dozens of T-64 and T-72 tanks, modernized with thermal optics and NATO-supplied munitions, pushed forward in disciplined formation. Their engines growled low, their guns already locked on burning silhouettes in the open fields. The Russians, distracted by drones and shell fire, never saw them coming. At 6:05 a.m., the forest edge lit up with muzzle flashes. A coordinated barrage of high-velocity shells streaked across the fields, slamming into Russian armor trapped on the road. In the first 7 minutes of fire, at least 15 tanks were destroyed outright. Explosions ripped through ammunition racks, sending turrets, some weighing over 10 tons, flying high into the air before crashing back to Earth. Russian crews scrambled to respond. Some tried to pivot their turrets toward the forest line, but Ukrainian tanks fired, repositioned, and fired again with deadly precision. For every round Moscow's vehicles managed to launch, 2 or 3 Ukrainian shells answered back. Infantry caught in the crossfire suffered even worse. Entire squads were cut down as machine gun units riding behind the tanks sprayed suppressive fire across open ground. The battlefield became a vision of hell, flames rolling across wheat fields, shattered armor smoldering in ditches, and men fleeing in every direction. The once confident spearhead was now reduced to pockets of resistance, soldiers huddling behind wrecks, commanders shouting orders no one could hear over the thunder of explosions. By 6:30 a.m., fewer than 30 Russian tanks remained operational, many damaged, some immobilized in the mud. Infantry losses climbed into the hundreds, and morale collapsed. What Moscow had envisioned as a clean breakthrough had turned into a nightmare. And yet, Ukraine wasn't done. Syrskyi had one more card to play. A wave of precision drones programmed to hunt down survivors and erase the assault completely. By 6:45 a.m., the Russian offensive was in ruins. Tanks burned in rows along the roadside, infantry scattered into barns, ditches, and half-collapsed farmhouses. But General Syrskyi knew that leaving survivors would mean another assault tomorrow. The order was simple: hunt down every remaining pocket of resistance. Ukraine's reconnaissance drones fanned out across the battlefield, dozens at once. Their cameras scanned every tree line, every crater, every structure that could hide a squad. Operators in underground bunkers marked positions in real time, relaying coordinates to artillery batteries and strike teams. The battlefield was no longer guesswork. It was mapped in high definition. Then came the final wave. Suicide drones, small but devastating, were dispatched directly to the marked positions. They plunged into trenches where Russian soldiers huddled, detonating with terrifying precision. Barns collapsed into fireballs, ditches erupted in blasts that hurled men and debris into the air. In less than 20 minutes, more than 100 Russian troops were neutralized. Some surrendered. In one drone feed, a Russian conscript dropped his rifle and raised his hands toward the hovering camera, pleading for mercy. Others fought with hopeless defiance, firing their last rounds at the sky until Ukrainian artillery silenced them. For those who tried to flee, fast-moving Ukrainian units on motorcycles closed in. Armed with rifles and grenade launchers, they swept through villages, rounding up survivors. By noon, nearly 300 Russian soldiers had been captured alive. Their weapons lay scattered across the dirt, their uniforms stained with smoke and ash. When the dust settled, the toll was staggering. Of the 70 tanks Moscow had thrown into the assault, fewer than 20 remained intact, most abandoned. Infantry losses exceeded 800. Ukraine, by contrast, suffered only a fraction, 24 dead and several wounded. The convoy that Moscow had billed as unstoppable was nothing but a smoldering graveyard. And the message was clear: brute force alone could not break Ukraine's defenses. By the time the smoke lifted over Donetsk, the outcome was undeniable. Moscow had hurled enormous resources into a single strike: 70 tanks, 30 engineering vehicles, hundreds of drones, and over 1,000 elite troops. On paper, it was overwhelming. In reality, it was a catastrophe. What was meant to be a decisive breakthrough collapsed into one of Russia's most humiliating defeats of the war. An armored spearhead reduced to wreckage, infantry shattered or captured, drone operators blinded by jamming, commanders cut off and powerless. The convoy had been annihilated in just a few hours. For Ukraine, the victory was more than numbers. It was proof that strategy, preparation, and creativity could topple brute force. General Syrski had turned an early setback, the premature detonation of a minefield, into an opportunity. Instead of panic, he adapted. Instead of retreat, he struck harder. And the result echoed far beyond the battlefield. The lesson was clear. Modern war is no longer won by sheer mass. It is decided by agility, by innovation, and by willpower. Ukraine used drones not as a supplement, but as a central weapon of war. They didn't just harass armor, they destroyed it. They didn't just scout enemy positions, they broadcast them live, guiding artillery and tanks with surgical accuracy. Every wrecked vehicle, every burned trench, was a testament to the speed at which warfare is evolving. For Russia, the implications are grim. Billions of dollars worth of steel and manpower were lost in a single morning. And worse, their soldiers left behind the image of surrender, hands raised toward cameras, pleading for survival. A defeat recorded, streamed, and remembered. For Ukraine, it was a signal to the world. Resolve and ingenuity can overcome even the most daunting odds. And yet, as powerful as this victory was, the war is far from over. Each battle sets the stage for the next. Each ambush raises the stakes. What comes after this fiery ambush could reshape the entire front. If you believe these stories must be told, the untold truths of modern warfare, support our work. Subscribe, share this video, and help us keep shining light on what others try to hide. Because as this battle showed, in modern war, there is no escape.